All right, everyone ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely.
Today we're looking at something pretty interesting, a CBS News article about Senator Lisa Murkowski.
Murkowski.
And she's a Republican, by the way. This article talks about how she's been pushing back against some of President Trump's recent actions.
Oh, wow. That's...
Yeah, it's not every day you see a senator going head-to-head with a president from their own party, is it?
No, not really.
So let's try to figure out what's going on here. Why is Murkowski so fired up, and what does it all mean?
It is a fascinating situation, having a moderate Republican senator who's willing to challenge someone like President Trump.
Exactly. He's not exactly known for backing down from a fight.
Right.
Yeah. One of Murkowski's biggest concerns seems to be Trump's decisions on firing federal workers and cutting agency budgets. She even talked about a specific case.
Oh, really?
Yeah, during a recent town hall, a virtual one of her own constituents who used to work for Murkowski, before taking a job at NOAA, this person was fired, no chance of appeal or anything.
Wow, that's harsh.
It is pretty stark, right?
Yeah.
And this example gets right to the heart of Murkowski's argument, that these firings and budget cuts are breaking the Budget and Impoundment Control Act.
Those apps are so important. They're like safeguards, preventing a president from just ignoring the budget that Congress worked on.
So it's like a check on the president's power when it comes to spending.
Exactly. It's all about balance. Imagine a president deciding they just don't like a program Congress funded. Let's say it's something for the environment or education. Without the Impoundment Control Act,
They can just not spend the money.
yeah, they could just refuse to spend the money, essentially going over Congress's head.
So that's why Murkowski's saying Trump is overstepping.
Right. She's saying he's going too far. Congress needs to push back and reclaim their authority on the budget.
That makes a lot of sense. But Murkowski herself has said it's a tough battle to get other Republicans to actually challenge the president on this.
Yeah, why do you think that is? What's behind that hesitation?
Well, it might show a real dilemma for the Republican Party right now. There are Republicans who aren't comfortable with everything Trump does, but they don't want to openly criticize him either.
Right, they don't want to alienate his base.
Exactly. They need those voters.
Makes sense.
So you've got this internal struggle within the Republican Party, but this CBS article also talks about Murkowski criticizing Trump's stance on the war in Ukraine, which seems to be changing.
Oh yeah, that's been all over the news.
Right? He recently called Zelenskyy a dictator and even blamed Ukraine for the war.
That is a pretty big change from before, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And on top of that, Trump's aides have had meetings with Russian representatives in Saudi Arabia.
Really?
But here's the kicker. No Ukrainian officials were present at those meetings.
So they're discussing the war without even involving one of the main players. What kind of message is that sending?
Right. It raises a lot of questions about U.S. foreign policy, about support for Ukraine.
It could even embolden Russia, seeing Ukraine excluded like that?
Absolutely. And Murkowski's not letting this slide either. She's directly refuted Trump's comments, making it clear that she believes Putin started the war.
Good for her. Standing up for what she believes.
Right, and she emphasized how crucial it is to be truthful about who's responsible for the conflict.
It's important to stick to the facts, especially in a situation like this.
Exactly. This all points to a fundamental difference in how Trump and Murkowski see Russia, right?
Yeah, it seems like they're viewing the whole situation through totally different lenses.
Right. Trump has said he trusts Russia, that they want the war to end, despite all their past aggression.
And Murkowski's convinced Putin's the one who started it all.
Exactly. So where do other Republicans stand on this? Are they siding more with Trump's view or with Murkowski's?
That's a great question.
Well, we have seen people like Senator Thune and Representative Bacon speaking out, but it's been much more cautious.
So they're disagreeing with Trump, but carefully.
Yeah, they're disagreeing with his stance on Ukraine, but without directly attacking him.
They're trying to avoid upsetting his base, which makes sense.
It's a tricky situation for them, for sure.
Absolutely. Walking a tightrope.
It seems Murkowski's decided to skip the tightrope altogether and just say what she thinks.
Yeah, good for her. What do you think this means for her future in the Republican Party, though? And how will her being so outspoken affect things more broadly? That's where it gets really interesting.
I like where you're going with this.
It's definitely just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, let's dig a bit deeper into this whole thing after a quick break.
It really does. Senator Murkowski speaking out like this is throwing a wrench into the ears of the Republican Party. They have to face some hard questions about where they stand with Trump, how much they're willing to tolerate.
It's highlighting that divide within the party, isn't it? And speaking of highlighting, let's get back to those federal firings and budget cuts. Remember, Elon Musk is the one pushing these cuts. He's now in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency.
That's right. I'd almost forgotten about that. It's pretty wild to think about, isn't it? The guy who's famous for shaking things up in tech is now trying to do the same with the government.
It's a strange mix, for sure. Musk is a controversial figure. His way of doing things doesn't always fit with how the government usually operates.
Yeah, that's bound to cause friction, maybe lead to some unexpected outcomes.
And those outcomes are hitting Alaska pretty hard. Murkowski mentioned that her state has one of the highest numbers of federal workers per person, outside of D.C., obviously.
So these firings are affecting a lot of people's lives.
Exactly. Their jobs, their livelihoods. It's not just some abstract political debate for them. It's impacting their communities, their families.
Right, and that's why Murkowski's being so vocal about it. She's representing her constituents who are directly affected by these decisions.
And she's not just talking about it behind the scenes either. She used that virtual town hall as a platform to really address these issues. She said over 1,000 people dialed in, all worried about what these cuts would mean for them.
That shows how much anxiety and uncertainty there is among those affected.
It's definitely unsettling. And Murkowski shared a very personal example of that story about her former employee who was suddenly fired from NOAA. She described it very vividly.
What was it like?
Getting a notice on a Friday telling you you're out of a job, no warning, no chance to appeal.
Wow, that's tough. It's easy to forget sometimes in all the political back and forth that real people are being affected by these decisions.
Exactly. And what struck me is that this woman had actually just gotten a promotion. But because of that, she was considered a probationary employee, which made it easier to let her go.
Almost like they use that as a reason to justify firing her.
It does make you wonder about the fairness of it all. You'd think if someone's good enough for a promotion, they should have a fair chance to prove themselves.
It makes you wonder if things were done properly.
And Murkowski really emphasized that point, talking about the lack of respect shown to these federal workers. It's like their years of service don't matter in this rush to make cuts.
It can be really demoralizing for federal workers if they feel like their work isn't valued, their jobs are always at risk. It's going to affect morale and productivity.
I hadn't thought about that. So it's not just about the people who are being fired, it affects the whole government workforce.
Exactly. That's why it's important to have a well-thought-out plan for government reform. Efficiency is a good goal, but it shouldn't come at the cost of fairness, transparency, and respect for the people who keep the government running.
It's a tough balance to find.
It really is. Thinking about the bigger picture, what do you think this says about our political system right now?
Well, it's a pretty complex picture, isn't it? You have someone like Murkowski who's willing to challenge those in power, even when it means going against her own party. But then you have a system that seems more and more divided, where compromise is rare.
And then you add people like Elon Musk to the mix who come in and shake things up even more. It's a really interesting time to be witnessing all this, but also a bit unsettling.
It is. So where do we go from here? What happens next?
That's the big question. And speaking of big questions, let's move on to Murkowski's stance on the war in Ukraine. We talked about how it differs from President Trump's evolving narrative, but it's interesting how her disagreement extends to the international stage as well.
It's like a clash of perspectives with potentially big consequences. You have Trump seeming to move towards a more conciliatory stance with Russia, while Murkowski remains firm in her support for Ukraine and holding Putin accountable.
It's like they're reading from totally different scripts.
Exactly. And this different approach has implications beyond just words. It affects diplomacy, military aid, even how American leadership is perceived globally.
It really does. It's not just Murkowski pushing back against Trump on this either. Remember Senator Thune and Representative Bacon? They've also voiced their disagreement, though they're being a bit more careful about it.
Right, tiptoeing around the issue.
They're trying to distance themselves from some of Trump's more controversial positions without upsetting his supporters. It's a tough balancing act.
It makes you wonder how long they can keep that up. Will there come a point where they have to pick a side more definitively?
Who knows? It's a constantly changing situation. Things could shift at any moment.
It's like we're watching a political thriller in real time with really high stakes.
Absolutely. The stakes are bigger than just the careers of these individuals. We're talking about the future of our country, our place in the world.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also really important to stay informed and engaged. The more we understand these complex issues, the better we can participate in the conversation and make our voices heard.
I couldn't agree more. When Murkowski held that town hall, it wasn't just general worries that came up. She gave a specific and really unsettling example of how these cuts are affecting people. She talked about a woman who had worked for her before moving to NOAA.
NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
That's the one. They do weather forecasting, climate monitoring, ocean research, all that important stuff.
Right, essential stuff.
Exactly. And this woman had a ton of experience in her field. But because she'd recently been promoted within NOAA, she was considered a probationary employee.
I see where you're going with this.
Unfortunately, yeah. That made her a target for these cuts. Murkowski said this woman was suddenly fired, no chance to appeal, basically left with a black mark on her record.
That's rough. Sounds like a classic case of using bureaucracy to get rid of positions.
And the lack of due process is just one part of it. Murkowski talked about how this woman had dedicated years to public service, both in her office and at NOAA. To be pushed aside like that, with no regard for her experience, is pretty disheartening.
It makes you question the priorities of the current administration. Seems like efficiency is more important than anything else, even basic fairness and respect for people who've served their country.
It really shows that these political decisions have real consequences for people. It's not just policies, it's people's lives being turned upside down.
It highlights the need for leaders who are not just competent, but also compassionate. Leaders who understand the impact their actions have on real people.
Well said. Bringing it back to Senator Murkowski, her decision to challenge President Trump, even when it could hurt her politically, is something else.
It is a bold move. What do you think is motivating her? Is it just a matter of principle, or is there something else going on?
And what kind of impact will this have? Will it encourage other Republicans to speak out against Trump? Or will it push her further away from her own party?
These are questions that only time will answer. But one thing's for sure. Senator Murkowski's actions have brought some much-needed complexity and nuance to our political discussions.
It's a nice change from the overly simplified narratives we usually see.
It is. It's a reminder that even now, when things are so divided, there are still people who are willing to stand up for what they believe in, even when it's hard.
It does give you a bit of hope.
It does, and it reminds us that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of our democracy.
Well said. You know, the 2026 presidential election's already starting to heat up. There's so much speculation.
It feels like the race has already begun, even though we're still a couple years away.
And with the current political climate, this election is shaping up to be a historic one.
Absolutely. It's early, but there are already some key storylines to watch. The possibility of a rematch between President Trump and former Vice President Biden is getting a lot of attention.
The Clash of the Titan, round 2.
Exactly. Both of them have hinted at running again, but neither has officially declared their candidacy yet.
Which just makes it more exciting, right?
Of course. And then there's the question of who else might enter the race. There have been rumors about potential candidates from both the Republican and Democratic parties, but no clear frontrunner yet.
It's early days, things can change quickly.
That's politics for you. But even now, it's clear that the 2026 election will be a crucial moment for our nation.
A chance to step back and look at our priorities, to rethink our values, to choose a new path forward.
And the choices we made as voters will have a huge impact on the direction of our country, our place in the world.
No pressure, right?
None at all. But seriously, it's important to approach this election informed and engaged. We need to learn about the issues, think carefully about the candidates, and make our voices heard through voting.
Couldn't agree more. It's our duty as citizens, and we shouldn't take it lightly.
Absolutely. You know, one thing that makes Senator Murkowski's political journey so interesting is that she's a moderate Republican who's found a unique space for herself in a party that's become increasingly divided.
It shows her political skill, her ability to navigate the complexities of our current political scene.
She's often called a maverick, someone who's willing to break from party lines and vote based on her own beliefs, even if it means criticism from her own side.
It's earned her both praise and criticism, depending on who you ask.
True, but it's also made her a force to be reckoned with in the Senate. Her willingness to work with the other side and find common ground is valuable in a place that's often stuck in gridlock and partisan fighting.
She's a great example of how compromise isn't weakness, it's strength.
Exactly. Especially in these divided times, we need more leaders like Senator Murkowski who are willing to bridge the gaps and find solutions that work for everyone.
Well said. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about healthcare reform.
Healthcare, always a hot topic. It's complex and always sparks debate and a lot of different opinions.
It's a complicated mix of competing interests, different ideologies, and constantly increasing costs.
And trying to make sure everyone in America has access to good, affordable health care is a challenge that has stumped policymakers for years.
It's a puzzle with a lot of pieces, and there's no easy solution. But that doesn't mean we should give up on finding a better way.
Definitely not. We need to have open and honest conversations about the challenges we face and the potential solutions that are out there.
And we have to be willing to compromise and work together to find a way forward that benefits everyone.
I completely agree. The health and well-being of our country depends on it.
Well said. And speaking of the well-being of our nation, let's talk about the environment.
Our planet, a topic that's becoming more and more urgent every year.
The evidence of climate change is everywhere we look, from rising sea levels to more extreme weather. And the science is clear. Human activity is contributing to the warming of our planet. We need to do something.
Absolutely. But finding a way to balance economic growth with protecting the environment is one of the biggest challenges we face.
It's a complicated issue with no easy answers, but we can't ignore it.
We need to move towards a more sustainable energy future, cut down our carbon emissions, and protect our natural resources for the generations to come. And we need to do it in a way that's fair and equitable for everyone.
Absolutely. The future of our planet and the well-being of future generations depends on it.
Well said. Speaking of the future, let's talk about something that's both exciting and a little scary. How fast technology is changing.
From artificial intelligence to gene editing to the metaverse, it feels like the world is changing faster than ever before.
These advances have the potential to change our lives in big ways, for better or for worse.
It's a time of great opportunity, but also great uncertainty.
We need to be careful about how we use the power of technology and try to reduce any potential risks.
And we need to make sure that everyone benefits from these innovations, not just a few. We need to talk seriously about the ethics of these technologies and how they'll shape our future.
It's a fascinating time to be alive, but also challenging.
It is. And it's up to all of us to engage with these issues and help create the future we want.
Well said. Let's bring our conversation back to Senator Murkowski. Her willingness to challenge the way things are, to speak her mind, and to work across party lines is really inspiring.
It's a reminder that we don't have to be defined by our political labels or our beliefs. We can choose to think for ourselves, to stand up for what we believe in, and to work together to find common ground.
And that's something we all need to hear, especially now when things are so divided.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world and Senator Murkowski, let's take a moment to think about what we've learned.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've explored the complexities of politics, the challenges facing our nation, and how important it is to stay informed and involved in our democracy.
And we've been reminded that even in these difficult times, there are still people who are willing to fight for what they believe in and make a difference.
It gives you hope for the future.
It does. So what happens next in this political drama?
That's the big question, isn't it? Murkowski speaking out has definitely shaken things up. It's forced a conversation, both within the Republican Party and in politics more broadly.
So what do you think will happen? What impact will Murkowski's stance have? Will other Republicans feel emboldened to challenge Trump? Or will there be even more division within the party? What about her re-election chances in 2028? Will this help or hurt her? Could someone who's more aligned with Trump challenge her in the primaries? Yeah, it really changes how we see her chances for re-election. And thinking bigger, how will all this affect the Republican Party's plans for the 2026 presidential election? Will they go all in on Trump and his style, or try to distance themselves from some of his more extreme views?
It's a tough situation for them. They need to figure out how to appeal to Trump's base without alienating moderate voters and independents who might be turned off by his more controversial positions. And remember, the situation in Ukraine makes things even more complicated. Could Trump's changing stance on Russia and the war potentially alienate some of those moderate Republicans and independents?
That's a great point, especially now that conflict is on everyone's mind. It's not just a foreign policy issue anymore.
Exactly. So there's a lot to think about, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But one thing's for sure. Senator Murkowski being willing to stand up and challenge the status quo is a reminder that even in these divided times, there's still room for independent thinking, for principled leadership, for doing what's right.
Yeah, it is a hopeful message. It shows that one person can make a difference. We don't have to just follow the crowd, even when it feels like everyone else is.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Senator Murkowski, keep those questions in mind, pay attention to how things develop, and thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a fascinating one.
It really has. And who knows what surprises are waiting for us down the road. Keep thinking critically, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.